So, welcome to your first flipped learning lesson in science. I'm just going to go through a couple of the things that I want to explain about how we're doing this. So, I'm just going to get my lightsaber out to help with this. So, you'll watch the video and complete some of the activities that you're given on the worksheet for your homework. Complete as many as you possibly can do. You'll post your activities in the box as your homework. Then you'll do a mini test next lesson. And then depending on your answers in the mini test, you'll complete different activities during that lesson to try and push yourself a little bit further. So you can do a lot of the learning at home, and then during the lesson we're just going to try and extend your answers. So the title of today's lesson is How Do Living Things Rely on Each Other? So we're going to be looking at different organisms and how they work together. This whole topic is called interdependence. So the progress criteria for today's lesson are to describe a simple food chain, and this is something you should have done at primary school. We're just going to quickly refresh our memory with that. You're going to explain how changes can affect a food web, and then you're going to analyse food chains using something called a pyramid of biomass and also a pyramid of number. Now the purpose of this lesson is that living things have complex relationships that mean they must rely on each other for survival. And the unit looks at the way organisms interact and how changes can affect them. It has a strong link to the maths that you'll be doing as you go through school. So we'll be looking at these ideas of pyramids of biomass and number, doing some graph drawing. So the worksheet that you're given for homework is shown here. You've got different activities all over the sheet. So your first activity is the keywords, writing down the definitions for those, and that's found in this corner over here. So you'll see many of the keywords that you'll be looking at during this lesson. Now you can complete these activities at any point, but I've made suggestions throughout the PowerPoint. If you look over on the side, you've got the other activities, activity 2, 3 and 4, a few questions there for you to answer. And then down at the bottom you've got the last two activities, activity 5 and 6, which want you to draw graphs. Okay, and you're going to learn during this lesson how to draw those two graphs. So first up, there are your keywords. You've got interdependence, the title of the unit, food chain, producer, predator, pyramid of numbers, consumer, prey, tertiary, food web, and pyramid of biomass. So if you can already define some of those words, go ahead and do that now. You might want to pause the video. So the first main part of this lesson is what is a food chain? So you should have an idea about these from primary school, but just to refresh your memory, you have at the start of every food chain something that is known as a producer. So in this food chain, that is the cabbage. Now a producer is called this because it produces its own food, and it takes that energy from sunlight to produce glucose by the process called photosynthesis, something that you'll learn about in more detail later. You may want to, as part of this learning, go away and find out what photosynthesis is now. More than welcome to do that. Now, the arrows on this diagram tell you the direction in which the energy is travelling. So the energy from the cabbage goes into the rabbit when the rabbit eats the cabbage. When the rabbit is eaten by the stoat, the energy from the rabbit goes into the stoat, and so on until the energy gets into the fox. Now, we call the rabbit the consumer. It is actually the primary consumer, primary meaning first. So it's the first consumer and it eats the producer. We then have the stoat, which is the secondary consumer, and then you have the fox, which is the tertiary consumer. And tertiary just means third level. So it's the third level along. Okay? So in this diagram, you'll see that we have predators and prey throughout this. So we have the rabbit here, which is not the predator of anything. You don't call it predator of a cabbage because the cabbage can't run away from it or anything like that, it can't hide from it. So the rabbit is prey for the stoat. The stoat is the predator of the rabbit, but it is also the prey of the fox. And the fox doesn't have any predators itself, so it is not a prey. However, the fox will be the predator of the stoat. So you'll see as you go through a food chain, you have different levels there, with prey, an organism that is predator and prey, and then something that is just a predator at the top of the food chain there. And we call that the top predator, or the top carnivore. So you may know these as carnivores because they eat meat. You may know the rabbit as a herbivore because it eats plants. You do get some organisms, such as humans, that are omnivores, which means they eat both plants and animals. So you might want to pause this video now so that you can go and complete activity 2. So it's rarely that simple that you just get something that's a food chain. In reality, there's lots of different relationships, and you can see this example that I'm giving you here, where you've got the cod right at the centre of it, lots of other fish around there. This is an Atlantic food web, this is known, where there's lots of different organisms all over with quite a complex set of relationships. So what we have to be able to draw is something called a food web. So we're going to look at a slightly simplified version of that now. So here you go. This is an African food web. It's a more simplified version for you. And you can see down at the bottom we have producers. So you've got the acacia bush, stargrass, red oak grass, and then you have the various animals that are involved in consuming them. So you have the zebra that will consume the red oak grass, so that's a primary consumer, which is then eaten by the cheetah. Now you notice again the arrows show the direction that the energy is travelling. So the energy goes from the grass into the zebra into the cheetah. So a food web is just a more complicated mix of lots of food chains. So what I'd like you to do is to pause and have a go at activities 3 and 4. Now you may want to wait until the end of the whole video, but from here you should be able to create your various food chains as you look through that. Now, activity 4 asks you what will happen when certain organisms die. So I'm going to give you an example here. If the wildebeest, which you can see here, dies off, let's say there's a lot less of them, they get ill, maybe a form of flu goes through the wildebeest, there's less of them alive. If there's less wildebeest, that means there's less food for the cheetah, the hyena and the lion. If they have less food available to them, these 3 organisms at the top, they're going to have to find food from elsewhere. So let's take the lion for example. If the lion can't eat the wildebeest anymore, it's got to eat more impala, more Thompson's gazelle and more zebras. So that will mean that the numbers of zebras, wildebeest, impala, Thompson's gazelle have all reduced, and that has then knock-on effects. If there's now less Thompson gazelle, there'll be even less food for the hyena to eat, so that's going to impact on the numbers of hyena as well. So there's huge knock-on effects around the food web. So for activity number 4, I'd like you to go away and try and explain what would happen if the numbers of warthog and the numbers of grasses changed. Unfortunately, food web will only show you what eats what. It doesn't tell you how much of each organism gets eaten. So we need something that allows us to get a little bit more technical, and that's where something called a pyramid of numbers comes in, and that's what we'll look at next. So here we are then looking at pyramids of numbers, and this is a way of actually showing how many are being eaten. So this is a simple food chain you might find in an English garden. So you have rose bushes, they get eaten by aphids, which are a little plant-eating insect, and aphids get eaten by ladybugs or ladybirds. The little blue arrows there, again, are showing the direction the energy travels in. So the energy made by the producer, the rose bush, gets passed on to the consumer, the primary consumer, the aphid, and then on to the secondary consumer, the ladybird. So you can see the energy moves in that direction. So here we've got a picture of 3 rose bushes. I've actually written 5 there. So we have 5 rose bushes. On those 5 rose bushes, you find 75 aphids. There's lots of little aphids there, not quite 75, but 75 aphids. And feeding off those 75 aphids are 40 ladybugs. So that shows you the relationship between the 3 things there. So we have the rose bushes being eaten by the aphids, aphids being eaten by the ladybugs, and this shows you how many are involved in that relationship. Now what we do is we draw a pyramid to demonstrate that. It's a little mathematical drawing, it's a little graph. I'm going to show you how to do that on the next slide. So I'm going to show you how to draw a pyramid of numbers now. We start off with the producers. So down at the bottom we had the rose bushes, and we had 5 rose bushes. So in this example I'm going to use 1 square on this graph to equal 5 organisms. Remember, this is a pyramid of numbers, so it tells you how many organisms there are. So the first thing that I need to do is to add my rose bushes down at the bottom. So there we have it, my rose bushes nicely drawn in. So the next thing I need is to add on the aphids, the number of aphids. So if you remember in the example there were 75 aphids. So now I need to add in the correct amount of squares going across, which is 15 squares. So I'll add that in now. There we go, so that's our aphids. So we have 75 of them. Remember, each square is worth 5. So the final thing we have to put on is the number of ladybugs that go onto the top of there. So if you remember, there were 25 ladybugs. So if you remember, there were now ladybirds that need to go on top, and we had 40 ladybirds living off the 75 aphid. So what we need to do is draw that in now. So that's going to be 8 squares. So it's 40 divided by 5 equals 8. So there you have it, a very simple pyramid of numbers, and it shows you just the relationship between the number of organisms within that food chain. Now the only problem with this is that it doesn't show exactly how much is being eaten. We'll look at that in our next activity. So you may want to pause at this point and have a go at activity number 5 on your worksheet, which is an example of this that I'd like you to draw. So you may want to wait until later, that's entirely up to you. So we'll move on now to have a look at a way of looking at actually how much food or how much energy is getting passed on from each level, because obviously this gives a false impression of what is actually going on. So a pyramid of biomass will help explain that. So again, we're looking at rose bushes being eaten by aphids and the aphids being eaten by the ladybugs. So we've got the same example here. We've got the 5 rose bushes, the 75 aphids, and we've got 40 ladybirds. Unfortunately, the formatting's gone a bit funny here, so things are getting covered up. But I'll explain all the numbers. So 5, 75, and then we've got 40 ladybugs again. So this time what we're doing is we're talking about this thing called biomass. Now biomass is the amount of biological matter inside something. So we measure it in kilograms, and basically what it means is if you dried out, so removed all the water from all the 5 rose bushes that we have, and you measured the mass that was left, so the stuff that had been made using the energy from photosynthesis, so the things that would be left over would weigh 150 kilograms. And then you do the same for the aphids. So 75 aphids, if you dried them out, we're saying here, just for this example, that they would be 5 kilograms of what we call biomass. So the energy that is taken when the aphid ate the rose bush made 5 kilograms of aphids. So then the energy that came from the aphids and went into the ladybirds, the 40 ladybirds, if you dry them out, they equal 1 kilogram. So again, like I say, this is just an example. It's not real life in terms of the masses that we're talking about there. So what we then do is we draw a pyramid of this, and this shows you actually the amount of energy that moves from one level to another. So again, I'm going to do a worked example of this for you. So in this example, I'm going to show you how to draw a pyramid of biomass. Now this time, when we're using the squares, because we've got 150 kilos of the rose bushes, each square that we've got down here is going to be worth 10 kilograms. So we need to think carefully about how we're doing this. We've got 150 kilograms of rose bush. That means we need 15 of these squares. So I'll draw that in now. So next we need to add on our 5 kilos of aphids. Remember, this is the biomass, so this is the amount of mass that has been made of aphids based on the energy that they got from the rose bushes. So what I'm going to do now is draw that in. So if we've got 5 kilos, that's going to be half a square. Then to top off our pyramid, we need to add in the ladybirds. Now the ladybirds, because they're the last thing in the food chain, they actually have less total energy, so less biomass than the rest of them. They have 1 kilogram, so we need a very small slither on the top of our graph now, so we'll add that in. So there you have it, a pyramid of biomass. Now you'll notice that a pyramid of biomass gives you a much better pyramid to look at. So it actually has the shape of a pyramid now, unlike in the last slide where it had a slightly different shape to it, where it was sort of upside down almost. So The pyramid of biomass is the most complex version of it. So if you'd like to pause now, I've got activity 6 on your worksheet, which is another example, this time of a pyramid of biomass for you to have a go at. So that's the end of our lesson this time round. I hope you've enjoyed this sort of different way of doing it, a different way of doing your homework. Let me know what you think. It's just a practice, like we say, and maybe we can do more of it later. These will certainly remain up there, these lessons for you to look at, maybe for revision purposes. So, if you remember, we were looking at how do living things rely on each other. We've hopefully described a simple food chain. You've looked at how changes can affect a food web, and you've done an example of that for yourself, talking about how the warthog has affected the rest of the food chain that's going on there. And then you've analysed the food chains using pyramids of biomass and the pyramid of number. Hopefully you've managed to draw those. If you struggled with this last part, and you struggle to understand it, it's totally acceptable. I understand that might happen. You just need to make sure that you come and see me when you get back into the lessons. So hopefully it's given you a bit of an insight into the whole workings of what we call interdependence. And I'll see you back in school after the holidays. Bye.